Okay, so today we are going to discuss input-output management. But before we go there, I will discuss two topics which I should have done earlier, but somehow I skipped it. One of the topic is known as priority inversion, and it is related to CPU scheduling, especially when we are using primitive priority scheduling. So this is important. It means the processes are assigned priority, and whenever a high priority process comes, it can take CPU away from a low priority process. So let's say, under what circumstances we can encounter inversion of priority, means a low priority process can continue, but a high priority process is waiting for CPU to be available. So this can happen if there are three processes, and let's say these three processes are of different priority. So let's say the process with the lowest priority is represented by L, process with medium priority is represented by M, and H is a process with the highest priority of all these three processes. And also L and H, they are sharing a critical section on some resource. It means they are sharing a resource R in a mutual exclusive mode, and at a time only one of the processes can be in the critical section. And the way the solution for the critical section is implemented is through a lock. So whenever a process wants to enter the critical section, it will acquire the lock, then enter the critical section and release the lock. And we are assuming the other process will wait on lock by going to sleep. It might be busy waiting also, doesn't matter, but generally busy waiting will just use CPU cycles, and even if the process gets the CPU, it is just looping, and no useful work is being done. So you can treat either case. It wouldn't affect the fact that priority inversion will take place. So what happens that, let's say at a given time, L enters the critical section and acquires the lock. And the problem is that now the process H cannot enter the critical section. So it will either be busy waiting, or it will go to sleep. But L will not be able to run and release the lock, because whenever L gets the chance, M might preempt it. So the problem is that H is waiting for the lock to become available so that it can enter the critical section. But this lock cannot be released by L because it is being preempted by M. So in effect, the process M, which has got less priority than process H, gets to run on the CPU, whereas process H keeps on waiting. And this is priority inversion. So it means a high priority process cannot run because it is waiting for some resource to be released by a low priority process, whereas a medium priority process continues to run. Actually, this priority inversion was discovered in Mars rover Pathfinder, because the system would keep on booting, and because it was not able to run the high priority process, and then only they find out that this was what was happening. So how do we solve this problem? A simple solution is that what operating system can do, that if a high priority process is waiting for some resource, then the process that holds the resource can be, the priority of that process can be upgraded to the same level as this high priority process till the lock is released. And then the original priority is assigned to that process. So in that particular case, this process will not be preempted, and it will be able to release the lock. So in this particular case, the L process will inherit the priority of H process till the lock is released. So this is how priority inversion is solved by operating system. Any questions? So this was a topic I should have taken, but I think it is clear to you what is happening here. Next, I wanted to discuss was memory overlays, when we were discussing about early memory management in early system. I told you that initially the physical memory was quite expensive. So the idea was to use it to the maximum possible extent. And also, if the multi-programming was allowed in the system, then this physical memory will be divided across multiple programs. So now the program that you can accommodate in the memory will be of smaller size. So to overcome this problem, the concept of memory overlay was used. So in this particular case, if you look this scenario, there is a program which is consisting of, let's say, these functions, A, B, C, D, C1 and C2. And A makes call to D, C in turn can make call to C1 and C2. Now the point here is that at a time, A is either making a call to B or C or D. So at a time when A is in the memory, at the same time, either B will be in the memory or C will be in the memory or D will be in the memory. All of them cannot be together in the memory, okay? Because the way the program would be run. Similarly, when A and C are in the memory, then only C1 can be in memory or C2 can be in memory. So at any given time in the memory, either we have A and B, or we have A, C, C1, or we have A, C, C2, or we have AD. So when we are assigning the addresses, so the starting address for B, C, and D can be just after A. So the first instruction of B, first instruction of C, first instruction of D can be given the same address. Similarly, C1 and C2, they can be given the same address, but of course, this address will be distinct from C and A. So it means B, C, and D are overlays. It means they can be overlaid on the same memory space. Similarly, C1 and C2 can be overlaid. So what's the advantage of this scheme? If we do not use any overlay, then the memory required will be 40 plus 30 plus 20 plus 35 plus 17 plus 22. And I hope this calculation is done correctly. This will be 164 KB. Okay, but if we use overlay, then for these three, we will require a memory of only 35 KB because this is the maximum memory which will be used by D. If we do not consider C1 and C2. So if C1 and C2 are not part of the program, then the memory required will be 40 plus 35, 75. But if we use C1 and C2 also, then at a time either AC C1 is in the memory, or AC C2 is in the memory, or AB is in the memory, or AD is in the memory. So the maximum space required would the maximum space required for this scenario would be 40 plus maximum of 30, 20 plus 17, 20 plus 22, and 35. So which comes out to be 82 kilobytes. So through in modern processors, so modern desktop systems or laptop systems, we might not use memory overlays because hardware has a support for memory management unit and it supports virtual memory and paging. But in the embedded systems, which are used in automobiles or maybe washing machines or other devices, overlay concept may still be used so as to reduce the or smaller devices. It may still be used if they do not have any memory management system. So naturally, in case of memory overlays, it is the responsibility of the compiler. User will may define what are the overlays, or programming language itself may give a kind of structure in which the programmer can specify how the functions may be nested within the function, and compiler can reduce information that, or user can specify that these are my overlays, so that compiler will assign the addresses accordingly. Then we talked about free space management. Any questions till now? Any questions? Okay, so we'll talk about free space management. So generally free space management, this will be applicable to the heap space, because heap space you are allocating the memory and deallocating the memory. Or So what happens is that some of the regions in the heap space would either be in use, means they have been allocated, and there will be some regions which are not allocated or are free. So generally these free regions, they will be linked to a double linked list. So every region will have a pointer to the next block as well as the previous block. And generally it will also keep what we say a size field. So that operating system can use this size field to determine what is the size of this free chunk and allocate and whether it meets the request for the allocation or not. So now so let's say this is a heap which is consisting of 30 bytes, and it is the way it has been allocated. These two spaces of 10 bytes are free, and the middle part of 10 byte is in use, which is allocated. So so now when a request for next request for allocation comes, so the free space management system has to find out a free chunk, and this free chunk can be actually found by using first fit algorithm, best fit algorithm, worst fit algorithm, or next fit algorithm, as we discussed in variable partition partition memory. So so depending upon the request, the free one of the free chunks have to be divided into two parts, one to meet the request for allocation and second will still remain the free. So for example, let's say this is a scenario which looks like this. So if you look at this is the free space list. So in this free space list, the first free space is at the address 0 and it is at for the length 10. And the next one is at address 20 and length is 10. So basically this 20 could be a field here within this particular free space. Okay. So now when a request comes, and let's say the request of 8 bytes come. So either this free space or this free space can be used. Let's say the way it has been done, this free space is being used. Okay. So let's say this free space is being used. So because 8 bytes are required, so 8 bytes are, sorry, 2 byte request for 2 bytes comes. So 2 bytes are required. So these 2 bytes are allocated and 8 bytes remain the free. And naturally now operating system has to make changes in the free list. So this free, so here in this free list is the pointer to this free list. So we are not showing the pointers per se, but these values are recorded within the list only. So the actual size which is available would be this minus pointers, and when the allocation is done, operating system will take this into account. Okay, so the actual list is superimposed on the free blocks themselves. So here we have shown it for simplicity, but there is no separate free list. So basically on this only the operating system will keep information about that this is 10 bytes and the next address is at 23. And here it will keep the next address is at null. So that will be when we are using a single linked list, but if it's a double linked list, then previous of this will be null, which will be set to either 0 or -1, depending upon the operating system. And the next is at 23. For this, the previous is at 0 and next is at -1 or as I said, 0. So at the same time, it will also record the space for each free region. So once 2 bytes have been allocated, so naturally the length field and the address field will change. So address field, next address field in this particular case and length for this particular case will change. But if the adjacent memory location, adjacent memory regions are free, then these two free chunks will be merged into a larger free chunk. Now, the process of merging may not be done after every deallocation. It may be done while the operating system is trying to allocate something. It will because if every deallocation request is not followed by an allocation request, then merging would require searching for adjacent locations and it will increase the cost. So operating system may try to go for merging only when it is trying to allocate. so as to reduce this time complexity. Why they cannot be at the same, why can't they be adjacent? For example, in this particular case, another request for allocation comes, and this is the request for allocation. Now, if this gets deallocated, then free list is pointing to this, then this, then this, and now if something else gets, so the free regions in the free space list may not be actually adjacent on the physically on the memory. So they might be at different locations. For example, in this particular case, let's say this particular place is starting from address 0, but this is okay, and the next place which will come just after this is at address 10. But the way they were allocated and deallocated, they might not be coming. So if we were arranging them as per the memory addresses, then this would be the first in the, this should have been the first in the linked list, this should be at the second location, and this should be at the third position. But as I said, allocation and deallocation are not being done as per the memory address. It is being done as per, so the space which was allocated first may not be deallocated first. So allocation and deallocation are not in a first in first out order. It depends upon how the program is using the memory. So naturally the physically adjacent places may not be adjacent in the free space. So operating system will have to search to find out what is its adjacent space and whether it is free or not. So when operating system is trying to merge, it will find that it's this particular address is at address 0, the next address is at address 10. So yes, there was a node which was at address 10, so these two will be merged. So it will, so naturally the merging will be a complex operation. So either while whenever operating system frees or deallocates a space, so either it should ensure that the free space is inserted at the in some kind of order, so that when this space became free, it should have come here. But generally, as I said, the operating system wouldn't do that. It will actually try to pick it at the beginning of the list, so that deallocation can be done as fast as possible. So the idea is that during allocation, the operating system will try to see only if the request is not met to merge the adjacent nodes. So to merge the adjacent node, it will try to find out what will be the next consecutive address which can come after it and whether it is free or not. So in this particular case, yes, it is free, so these two will be merged. So when these two are merged, so it will become address 0 and length 20. So the next address is starting from 20, yes, it can be merged. So it will get this. So this merging will take more time. So either operating system can reduce the cost of merging while inserting a node in the free space list during deallocation, or it can put the entire cost of most of the cost of managing free space list during allocation. So depending upon the operating system, the complexity of this operation can be divided either between deallocation and allocation, or it can be completely shifted towards allocation. So depends upon how frequently the free space is being allocated or deallocated. So now the problem is when operating system, when you all have written these programs in C, and there are two system calls called malloc, that is memory allocation, and free. So in memory allocation, you always specify the size, number of bytes that you want to allocate. But when you use free system call, you do not specify any size. So naturally, when operating system is allocating a memory, then operating system has to somewhere keep information about what is the size of the allocation. So generally what operating system does, so whenever you make a call for memory alloc, what operating system is actually doing is allocating a block in which the first part is header, where it will keep the information about the number of bytes which are actually located. And then there is 35 bytes which are allocated. So the pointer that user receives is starting from this. And generally, user will not be allowed to write to this header. So this will be a protected place. Otherwise, heap space will be corrupted. So the actual allocation which is being done is equal to 30 bytes plus the size of the header. But this size of the header, sorry, 35 bytes plus size of the header, where the size of the header is being, where this part is, the green part is being managed by operating system. So now when you want to free, the operating system knows that this is the starting point of the pointer, and from here at this much plus or positive or minus offset is the header, and it will actually look at the header and find the actual size and deallocate that much memory. So generally, what is the information that it keeps in the header would be the size and some magic number that is just to ensure the integrity. This magic number can actually be informative about that that this process can use only this magic number. It may not be allowed to use other magic numbers or whatever. So it may be some kind of integrity check. So it can actually see that this header is not being modified, or this header can be this particular place can be used for this process only. So it can keep other information also, but generally this information will be kept. So as far as operating system is concerned, when it is going to release the free the memory, it will free the complete memory, and this will be added to the free space list. But as far as the user process is concerned, this can see only this much memory. So when so if there is a request of n bytes, so operating system has to find a free chunk which can actually accommodate n plus size of the header. So let's consider that initially the heap space does not have any allocation, no allocation has been done. So it is a completely free chunk. And let's say the size of the heap is equal to 4 kilobyte. Okay. And as far as the free spaces list is concerned, it has to keep, and we are assuming a single linked list in this particular case. So it has to keep the pointer to the next node. And this pointer to the next node is requiring, let's say, 4 bytes. And it also needs to keep how much is the size of the free chunk. So that will also require 4 bytes. So 4 bytes plus 4 bytes have to be written onto the free chunk itself. So the actual size which is available is 4088. Okay. So that's what I said. On the free chunk itself, the operating system will manage its data structure for keeping information about size of the free chunk. Now let's say a request of 100 bytes come. If a request of 100 bytes come, then operating system has to allocate this memory. And while allocating this memory, it has to allocate the header, and it has to allocate 100 bytes. Let's say we require, so header will keep information about size and magic number. Let's say these two also require 4 bytes each. So it means 100 bytes will be used for allocation, 100 bytes plus 8 bytes for header. And naturally, then the size of the free block will be reduced by 108. So I'm subtracting 108 from this size, and this will become 3980. So this portion is allocated, which is in use, and this is the free space. Now let's say we have done 3 allocations of 100 bytes each. So actual space that operating system has to reserve will be 108. This is the header, and 100. 108, this is the header, and this is the pointer. This is 108, 100, and pointer. So the actual space that will be reduced will now become, the free space is now 3764. So from this 3980, you subtract 108 and 108. That is 216. So if you subtract 216 from here, what you're going to get is 3764. And let's say this allocation was done, this allocation was done, this allocation was done. And now this allocation is this particular, so the programmer has a free call to free this space. So this part is about to be freed. So if this becomes free, so generally you will put it in at the beginning of the free space list. So this is the head of the free space list right now. Okay, the way we have described here, if you look at the header as well as the overhead structure on the free space list, both of them are requiring 8 bytes. So what will happen when you make it free? the head will move to this point. This becomes free, okay? And here, because this is free space list, it will this chunk is of 100 bytes because 4 bytes are reserved for using size, and this is the pointer to the next chunk in this free space list. So this is the address of this particular node. I've given any address right now, but it will actually depend upon how the allocation was done in the virtual address space. Now it is quite possible that if, let's say, the header size was not same as the size of the, so let's say the header has to keep some other information, or let's say the magic number is only 2 bytes. So if it is only 2 bytes, so this will require 6 bytes. So 106 bytes will be allocated here, 106 bytes will be allocated here, 106 bytes will be allocated here, and this will be now 8 more, that will be 3772. And now let's say this is being freed. If this is being freed, then 106 header is actually being replaced by 4 byte here and 4 byte here. So the actual size here will be actually 98. So in that particular case, this will be equal to 98. In this particular case, the size remains 100 because the header size is 8 bytes, and we are which is equal to the information which is required for the free space also. But if you look at the fields, they are different. They have to be interpreted different. In case of a allocated chunk, the first 4 bytes are size, and the next 4 bytes are a magic number. In case of a free space list, the next first 4 bytes are 100, and the next 4 bytes are the address of the next block. But in most of the cases, operating system actually maintains a double linked list. So naturally, there will be another pointer which is called previous, which will help it traversing it, not traversing it faster, but in that particular case, the size will be actually 4 bytes more reserved for another pointer. So it will be actually equal to 96 only. So this size will change to 96. Then there was buddy allocation method. I asked you to do it. So in this particular case, we are assuming that the free chunks are of the size 2 raised to power something. So let's say initially 2 raised to power 32 into 2 raised to power, sorry, 2 raised to power 5, sorry, 2 raised to power 6 into 2 raised to power 10. So this is 2 raised to power 16. So here m is equal to 16. So if a request comes, then depending upon the size of the request, these chunks are divided by 2. So division is basically right rotation, okay? So sorry, in this particular case, a request for 7 KB comes. So naturally 7 KB is too small for the 64 KB. So you divide it into 2 chunks, 32, 32. Then 32 is also larger than 7. So again, you divide into this 16, 16. But 16 is also larger than 7. So you divide it into 8 and 8. Now 8 is larger than 7, but if we divide it, it will become 4 and 4, which is less than this. So at this point, this particular part will be allocated to the system. And when system frees it, again, these two are merged to get a 16K block. So here the allocation and deallocation becomes faster because the merging becomes easier. So basically maintenance of the list becomes easier, and it can still accommodate variable size partitions. But so if the requests are of different sizes, which are more likely in case of any program, then it can be accommodated easily. But the main problem would be internal fragmentation. Okay. So for example, in this particular case, because 7 KB are actually used, so the internal fragmentation is equal to 1 KB. So let's say, what can you say if there is a request of 11 KB? What will be the fragmentation? Can you quickly tell me what will be the fragmentation? Anyone can speak? Deval?
Ma'am, 5.
5, yes.
5 KB.
Yeah, thank you. Now we discussed page replacement algorithm. So we said that if a process requires a new page, then operating system will bring that page from hard disk to main memory. Am I right? But what if there is no free page frame available in the main memory? Then operating system has to replace an old page. So this old page has to be written back to the hard disk. But generally, this old page may be required again. So what operating system does, when a page is replaced, it does not actually write it back to the program where the program is actually stored. It actually writes it back to a special region reserved by operating system for that purpose. And that region is known as swap area. Okay, so addition of swap space allows the operating system to still maintain an illusion of a large virtual memory. And the way this swap area is managed is different from the way the program space is managed. So program is nothing but a file. So it is written as a file onto the hard disk. But when a page is being replaced, the operating system actually just swaps it out to the hard disk. And the idea is that this swap area is not managed the same way as the file system is managed. So overhead of accessing data from this swap area would be less. Because in case of a file system, depending upon how the file is stored, it might be stored as a linked list. So if you want to access page number 10, then you may have to find out which block it belongs to, and then go what would be the position of that block by traversing the linked list. But in case of SWAP area, it can be still managed as a kind of a chunk, as an array of pages, and operating system can maintain a special table for the faster access. So as far as the swap space is concerned, it is also managed in terms of pages. It is also managed in the terms of pages. So this is basically how the physical memory will look like, and this is how the swap area is looking like. So in this particular case, each block is actually is equal to a page size. So these two virtual pages are for the process 0, these are for process 1, these are for process, this is for process 2, this is for process 3, and it can maintain a table from where it can faster access which page frame has to be loaded. If this page has to be brought back into the memory, it can do it faster. This is how the swap area is used. So if generally, if you reduce the size of the swap area, then if there is no space on the swap area, operating system has no option but to write the page back to the program file, and it could actually increase the access page access cost, and the performance may go down. So sometimes if you go through some solutions, if your system is becoming slower, one of the suggestion is to increase the swap area of your system. So what you can do is today you can try to find out how much is the size of the swap area on your system, and how do you change it. So most of you have got Ubuntu systems or Windows systems. So you can try to find out from where do you manage the swap area in your operating system, and just keep that a note for yourself, and try to change the swap area size and see whether it affects the performance or not. And now the significance of a present bit becomes important. So if the present bit is set to 1, then page is in the physical memory, otherwise it is on the disk. And then so instead of page frame number, it could be a location or index into the disk swap area. So now page fault control will also change accordingly. So let's say there is a reference to a virtual address is referring to some particular virtual address, but this virtual address is not the corresponding page is not present in the main memory. So this will result into a trap. Why trap? Because instead of hardware handling this scenario, we want operating system to handle this page fault. So operating system will now check whether the page, where the page is on the hard disk. So if the page has not been accessed yet, then naturally it will be part of your program. If the page has been accessed and swapped out, so it will be part of your swap area. So accordingly, the operating system will fetch the page and And this page will be brought into some page frame, and accordingly, and at the same time, depending upon which page frame this page has been brought into, operating system will change the corresponding entry of the page table. So it will actually mark that this particular page is present, and this particular page is valid, and this particular page is present in this particular page frame number. So that's how the page fault handling system will be modified when we are using the when we are not able to bring all the pages from the secondary memory to this memory. And those who are more enthusiastic, they can actually make a check here. Is this the first time the page is being loaded? Then it has to be brought from the program space. Otherwise, it has to be brought from the swap space. Sometimes even the swap area might also start becoming full. So some of the swap pages might be actually returned to the program file again. Okay, so that may also be there. Now, so this is what I wanted to cover in your memory management. And as I said that I left one of the topic in CPU scheduling, so I wanted to cover that. Now we will start with input-output management. So basically, if you look at any processor, it is connected to memory as well as input-output devices. So there might be some devices which are acting as input only. There are some devices which are acting as output only, and there are some devices which might be acting as both input and output. So for example, if you look at printer, it is an output device because there's no data that can be read from the printer. And if you look at a keyboard, it's an input device. But if you look at a hard disk or pen drive, they can be used as both input as well as output devices. So generally, most of the time, CPU will be interacting with memory. So a special bus, a proprietary bus may be used to facilitate high-speed data transfer between CPU and memory, because we do not want CPU to wait till data is being accessed from the memory. So there might be a special mechanism to pre-fetch the data, fetch more data than necessary, so that can reside in CPU buffer. And so this will be generally a high-speed bus. Then operating system, the CPU might be sending data to the display. So you might have another. So these buses are designed to ensure that the speed can match the so CPU can access the data from the respective device at the maximum possible speed. And generally, these devices will also contain what we call device controller. Generally, device controller will be receiving input from CPU, and depending upon that, they will actually transfer data to the device or transfer data from the device, and they will store it in a buffer. And once this activity has been done, so if the data is coming, so if the data is being transferred from CPU, actually it will be coming from memory. So from memory, it will be stored in the buffer of the output device. And once this has been transferred to returned to the proper position of the proper location of the output device, then it will actually send signal back to CPU and so on. So we'll come to it later on. So generally, this device will not be just a device. It will also have some specialized hardware to handle the data exchange between CPU and this device. And that particular hardware will be known as device controller. Okay. So generally, if you look at any device, its interface to the CPU will be through 3 registers. So generally, a device has to be allocated at least 3 addresses. The first address corresponding to status register, another address corresponding to command register, and yet another address corresponding to data register. So generally, a device will be identified by a set of n addresses. In this particular case, in the simplest scenario, there will be only 3 registers. So 3 addresses will be required to interface with this device, so that CPU can communicate with this device. So if CPU wants to know the status of the device, so it will read the content of status register. So it will issue read command for this particular address. And depending upon the status, it knows whether the device is free or whether the device is busy. Now, if the device is free, then CPU can write something onto the command register which will be a kind of, depending upon this command, what it can write as a command will depend upon the device itself. So it could be print one line, or stop printing, give the status of your toner. So for a printer, this can be the command depending upon what the printer supports. So what kind of command printer supports. So CPU will be writing to this particular register. As far as data is concerned, data register is concerned, the CPU wants to send some data to the device. So for example, here the command could be start printing. And then start printing what? The data. That data has to come to this particular register. Now this may not be a simple register, it may be actually a buffer. It may be generally it will be a buffer, because rather than sending data byte by byte, as in case of character device, it is better to transfer more data to the device, which is a block device. So you are transferring the block of data. So depending upon the device, this may be a buffer, or it may be a collection of 2 or 3 registers, or in some cases the number of registers will be more. So for all the registers which can be either read by CPU or written to by CPU, the number of addresses have to, distinct addresses have to be allocated to the device. Now these addresses may not be contiguous, but generally in most of the cases we assign a set of contiguous addresses to a device. So here, if CPU wants to do some action on the device, so first of all, it will check whether the device is free or not. So as long as the device is free, CPU has to wait. And once the device becomes available, it will send the command to the command register and write data to the data register. And then device will execute the command on that data, and then it will set its status. So before it starts executing the command, it will set its status to busy, then it will set its status to available. And when the CPU senses that if the device is available, it means the processing has been done. What I wanted to say here. Now, in this particular case, we are writing data to data register because we are talking about an output device. If it is an input device, then it will write command to command register, which means I want to read the data, and then the device will put that data into the data register. And then once the device becomes available, CPU will read the data from that data register. So this pseudocode here is for a output device. Now, how does operating system knows that a device is free? So one thing is that operating system periodically it will keep on checking it will issue an it will execute an instruction that is trying to read the status of a device register. So this particular process is known as polling, and if there are multiple devices, then operating system will try to check first device at time t equal to, let's say, t0, and then let's say after 5 seconds it will check the second device, then after 5 seconds it will check the third device, and so on and so forth, and then again comes back to the first device. So once a device becomes available, whatever processing it wants to do with that device, it will initiate that. The polling is easy to implement, but the problem is that while the system is being polled, CPU is waiting for input output to be done. So here the CPU is waiting for input output to be done. So CPU cycles are being wasted. So here the 1 means the CPU is executing some task, and here P means it is waiting, it is polling. So the device becomes free, does the work, and then again sends the result back to the CPU or whatever is there, and then second scenario is interrupt. So the idea is that CPU, so when a process requires input output, CPU, instead of wasting its cycles, sends the respective command to the input or output device, and then context switches to other process. So while the input output request is being serviced by the respective device, CPU can continue with another process. So in this particular case, the CPU cycles are not wasted, and CPU utilization will increase. But how would CPU know that the input-output request of process 1 has been met? So when a device finishes execution, when it completes the request, it will send a signal to the CPU, which is known as interrupt signal. So the idea is, in this particular case, both utilization of CPU as well as device increases. But what could be the problem? The problem would be that if a device is faster, if it is a fast device, then waiting for then sending interrupt to CPU until CPU services that request, waiting for that time can actually slow down the device. And if the device is fast, then it is better to go for polling mode. Otherwise, it is better to go for interrupt mode. Another problem with the interrupt is that it can lead to live lock. For example, let's say the packets are coming from coming to a system. Network packets are coming to a system. So whenever a packet comes, then interrupt will come, and interrupt handler will actually try to analyze the packet, and depending upon the packet IP addresses in the packet, it will process the packet. First of all, what is the type of the packet, and depending upon the packet, whether the routing table has to be changed, or whether the packet has to be forwarded to some other destination, or whether the packet has to be used for some processing at the local end. So depending upon that, operating system has to take some action. But let's say it is trying to process packet 1 and another packet comes, so another interrupt comes. So operating system will try to service that interrupt. So if the interrupts keep on coming, so most of the time operating system is actually trying to process interrupt rather than doing any useful work. So this is a kind of live lock, because operating system is busy, CPU is busy, but no useful work is being done. So it is a kind of live lock. So if there are too many interrupts, then it can lead to a live lock. So one of the possible solution to deal with the live lock is that you do not service each interrupt. So you buffer the data and then you deal with all of them together. So in case of packet dealing, you don't deal with one packet at a time, you deal with n number of packets at a time. So it means the n interrupts are actually merged into a single interrupt. So basically interrupt is done after n packets. So one single interrupt is generated for multiple packets rather than generating interrupt for each and every packet. So basically this is a concept which is actually used in denial of service attack. So you keep system. So most of the time the system is actually trying to deal with the to check that there is a request, and it's not able to process the request. Now, in case of hard disk, you are not sending 1 byte or 2 byte. You're sending a large chunk of the data. Okay, and then if the CPU is held till this data is being transferred from hard disk to memory, CPU cannot use this data till the memory, till that it comes into the memory. So when you are writing data to hard disk, so the data has to be transferred from memory to the hard disk, or when the CPU, or when the CPU is reading data, then it has to be transferred from hard disk to memory. Now this transfer itself can take time. So the idea is that you use a special hardware. So whenever CPU wants to transfer data to hard disk, instead of CPU doing this work is done by the direct memory access. So direct memory access controller is also connected to the bus, and whenever direct memory access controller starts transferring data data between memory and hard disk, then the bus connecting CPU and memory will be actually in tri-state as far as CPU is concerned. So CPU cannot access the bus. So direct memory access controller is accessing the bus and transferring the data from memory to hard disk or vice versa. So CPU is free to do whatever it wants to do. So it can context switch to other process and continue. Meanwhile, direct memory access is actually transferring the data. So generally it will be writing the data to a disk, to a buffer in the disk controller, because disk controller will be working at a faster pace than the hard disk. So once the direct memory access controller has written to this, so it will then interrupt the disk controller, and disk controller will start transferring the data from disk buffer to actually disk. This will be a slower process. So this buffer is actually to ensure to mismatch the to match the speed difference between direct memory access controller and the hard disk. So this is basically how it will be done. Now we said that every device has to be given an address. Now, and memory is also required to be given an address. So there are two ways where the memory, the devices can be assigned address. One is the device address space is completely distinct from memory address space. So it means if I have an address number 0, it can be assigned to memory also, it can be assigned to a device also. But to differentiate between these two addresses, the set of instructions which work on device are different from the set of instructions which work on the memory. So Intel has got two instructions, in and out. So when in instruction is used with address 0, it means we are talking about a device having address 0. Basically a device register with address 0. But if we use move instruction with address 0, it means we are talking about a memory location at address 0. So in case of input output, this is also known as input output mapped input output. So special input output instructions are used, and device address space is distinct from memory address space. So it means the same address can lie in device address space as well as the memory address space. Generally, this in instruction, the address that can follow this in instruction will be smaller than what can be actually a memory address. So generally, the set of the device addresses will be limited in this particular case. Second scenario is memory mapped input output, in which every location, every address will be treated as a memory address. So even the command register, status register, they will be treated as memory address. So the same address space will be used for assigning addresses to devices as well as memory location. So you use the same set of instructions. So this is what I wanted to discuss today. If you have any queries, you can ask me. Meanwhile, I'm posing a question on the classroom. So please answer that question. Okay, please answer the question on the classroom. Any questions? So I'll stop presenting. I don't know why chat is not working. Okay, so I'll stop the class, and we'll tomorrow, in the next class, we'll start up talking about hard disk access management. Can we schedule a class tomorrow? Yes. मैं चेंज करके आती हूँ।